Every house, every king, and every battle has its own truth. But there are stories older than crowns, darker than the night, and more dangerous than any blade. They were never written in books. They were whispered to fire, to the trees, and to the dead gods. And today, we dare to uncover one of them. Far to the north, where the wind sang through bare branches and snow lay thick upon the earth, the land waited. Winter had come to Westeros, silent and merciless, and with it came the promise of reckoning. In the cold mists of dawn, a black banner rippled against the pale light, the dire wolf of House Stark, long thought broken, flying once more. Beneath that banner rode Jon Snow, his breath rising in silver clouds, his thoughts heavy as the steel of his sword. He was a bastard born of Winterfell, once cast aside, now returned to fight for the home he had lost. Beside him rode Sansa Stark, her face calm, but her eyes fierce with purpose. She had endured more than any sister of Winter should have: betrayal, cruelty, and loss. And now she had come to reclaim her birthright. Together, they led a host of weary men through the frost-bitten fields toward the walls of Winterfell, where Ramsay Bolton, the bastard of the Dreadfort, awaited them. Ramsay, cunning and cruel, wore a smile sharper than any blade. He had taken Winterfell by blood and treachery, flaying those who opposed him, feeding his hounds on fear and flesh. To him, this was not a battle, it was sport. And he meant to break Jon Snow as he had broken so many others before. Jon's army was small, wildlings from beyond the wall, loyal Northmen who still remembered the honor of House Stark, and a handful of knights who believed in something greater than survival. Their camp stretched thin across the frozen plain, fires burning low against the night. Inside the command tent, Jon stood over a rough map of the north. The parchment was smudged and torn, the ink faded, yet it marked every stream, ridge, and hill that would soon run red with blood. "We can't beat him in numbers," said Tormund Giantsbane, his beard frosted with ice. "He'll have twice the men, and those horses of his, fast as wind, cruel as him." Jon nodded. "Then we must make him come to us. If we charge, we'll die." Sansa stood apart from them, wrapped in a cloak of gray and white fur. "You don't know Ramsay," she said quietly. "He plays with his prey. He wants you angry. He wants you to lose your head." Jon looked to her. "You know him better than I ever could. Tell me, what will he do?" Sansa hesitated, her hands tightening around the edge of her cloak. "He will hurt us before the battle even begins." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with memory. "He'll do something to make you forget your plan." The tent fell silent. Only the wind answered, whispering through the canvas. Outside, the men sharpened swords, checked arrows, and murmured prayers to old gods and new. The night deepened, and across the plain a horn sounded, low and distant. A Bolton rider approached under a white flag. Jon met him at the edge of the camp, the snow crunching underfoot. The rider dismounted and handed Jon a rolled parchment sealed with black wax. "A message from Lord Ramsay Bolton," he said, his tone mocking the very title. Jon broke the seal. The words within were written in a hand both elegant and cruel. "Your brother is with me. If you want him back, come and see how fast he can run." Jon's grip tightened. His heart thudded like a drum. Rickon, his little brother, alive. He turned to Sansa, but she already knew. She shook her head slowly. "It's a trap. Ramsay never gives without taking." Jon's voice was low. "If there's even a chance, then you'll ride into his game," she said, "and he'll win before the first arrow flies." Yet the next morning, When the pale sun rose over the frost, Jon stood again at the head of his army. Across the field, the banners of House Bolton unfurled, their flayed men gleaming crimson against the snow. The drums of war began to beat, steady and slow. Between the two armies, Ramsay Bolton rode forward on a black stallion, clad in thick leather and smiling as if he were greeting old friends, and at his side, dragged by a rope, was a boy, thin and pale, his hands bound. Rickon Stark. Sansa had been right. Ramsay meant to wound them long before swords met. Jon rode forward, his breath clouding in the air. He wanted to call out, to promise his brother safety. But Ramsay was already speaking, his voice carrying over the field. "Run to your brother," he said lightly, as if offering a gift. "Go on, Rickon. Run." He cut the rope. For a heartbeat, the boy stood frozen. Then he ran, barefoot over the snow, hair flying, eyes wide with terror. Jon spurred his horse. The world narrowed to that single moment, his brother's desperate sprint, the bowstrings whistle, the dread rising in his chest. Ramsay nocked an arrow, smiled, and loosed. The first arrow missed, then the second. Rickon ran faster. The third struck him through the back. Jon's world shattered. He galloped to the boy's side, but the light had already faded from Rickon's eyes. Around him, the snow drank the color of blood, and from across the field, Ramsay's laughter rang out, cold as the wind of the north. Jon rose slowly, grief turning to rage. Behind him, the Stark banners shivered. The battle had not yet begun, but already the game was set. The bastard of Winterfell would not rest until one of them lay dead upon the frozen ground. And in that moment, Jon Snow whispered a silent vow to the old gods watching from their trees. "Winterfell will be ours again." The horns sounded. The bastards' war had begun. The drums thundered like the beating of a monstrous heart, echoing over the frozen plain. From the walls of Winterfell, the flayed man banners of House Bolton snapped in the wind, crimson against the pale sky. Below, two armies faced each other across the snow, one born of cruelty and deceit, the other of honor and desperation. Jon Snow sat astride his black horse, Longclaw at his side, his eyes fixed on Ramsay Bolton across the distance. The world had narrowed to that single figure, smiling, calm, certain of his victory. Around Jon, his men shifted uneasily, their breaths steaming in the cold air. Tormund Giantsbane broke the silence. "We should wait for him to come to us. Let the bastard waste his strength." Jon said nothing. His hands gripped the reins so tightly his knuckles turned white. The image of Rickon's lifeless body burned in his mind. His little brother, slain for sport, cut down like prey. "Jon," Davos Seaworth urged, his voice low but firm, "remember what your sister said. Don't let him draw you out." But the wind carried Ramsay's laughter across the field, cruel and bright as a blade, and the sound tore through Jon's restraint. Before Davos could stop him, Jon spurred his horse forward. The northern host erupted in shouts. Wildlings and Northmen surged after him, horns blaring, the earth trembling beneath the charge. Arrows hissed through the air as Ramsay's men loosed their first volley, darkening the sky. Jon leaned low over his horse, his cloak whipping behind him. The world became chaos, the thunder of hooves, the scream of men, the hiss of arrows. The first ranks met in a clash of steel and fury. Wildlings wielding axes crashed into Bolton shields. Horses screamed as spears drove deep. The snow turned to mud, then to blood. Jon's horse was struck by an arrow and fell, throwing him to the ground. He rolled aside as a rider galloped past, his sword flashing down where Jon's head had been a moment before. Rising to his feet, Jon drew Longclaw, the Valyrian steel glinting in the half-light. The melee closed around him like a storm. There was no line, no order, only survival. Jon fought without thought, his blade rising and falling, cutting through flesh and armor alike. Every swing was driven by fury, every breath by grief. Bodies pressed close from all sides, men screaming and dying so near that the air itself seemed to suffocate. An arrow struck the man beside him. Another slammed into a shield behind. The ground grew slick beneath his boots, and the air stank of blood and smoke. Through the madness, Ramsay's voice rose again, mocking, distant, almost playful. "Loose!" Another rain of arrows fell. Ramsay cared nothing for his own men. His archers fired into the melee without pause. Jon saw arrows pierce Bolton and Stark alike, the cries of the dying swallowed by the roar of battle. "Shields!" someone shouted, but the command was lost. The Bolton line tightened, forming walls of spears and shields that pushed inward, trapping Jon's men. Tormund roared somewhere to his left, hacking at the enemy with a wildling's rage. One the giant smashed through ranks of Bolton soldiers, his massive hands sweeping them aside like stalks of wheat. But even the giant was bleeding, arrows bristling from his shoulders. Jon stumbled, nearly falling as a dying man clawed at his leg. He struck out blindly, his blade cutting through mail and flesh. He could no longer tell friend from foe. The battle had become a whirl of red and gray, life and death tangled together. The Bolton forces began their cruel tactic, tightening the circle, closing the trap. Shield walls moved inward, spears thrusting, cutting down the trapped wildlings like penned beasts. The Stark's forces found themselves pressed shoulder to shoulder, unable to move, unable to breathe. Jon was crushed between bodies, the air forced from his lungs. A man stumbled into him and fell, dragging Jon down into the heap of corpses beneath. The weight of the dead pressed on him from every side. He gasped for breath, snow and mud filling his mouth. For a moment, darkness closed in. Then, with a desperate surge, he fought his way upward, through blood, through flesh, through death itself, and broke free into the open air. He stumbled to his feet, gasping, the world spinning. Before him, the Bolton formation loomed, unbroken, merciless. Around him, his army was in ruin. And then, faint but growing, came the sound of distant horns. Jon turned toward the hills beyond the field. There, like ghosts in the snow, came the Knights of the Vale, ranks of shining armor descending in perfect formation, banners of the falcon flying beside the wolf. Sansa Stark stood upon the ridge, her face pale but unyielding. She had done what Jon could not. She had brought the Vale to their aid. The Bolton lines wavered as the Vale's cavalry struck. The thunder of hooves shattered their ranks, cutting through like a storm through branches. Jon saw Ramsay's smile falter for the first time. The battle turned. Bolton men broke and fled, their discipline dissolving under the relentless assault. One roared, tearing down the last shield wall as arrows rained upon him. Jon pressed forward, his sword slick with blood, his voice hoarse. "Winterfell," he cried. "For the North." The shout spread, taken up by 1,000 throats. "For the North." Through the chaos, Ramsay turned his horse and fled toward the gates of Winterfell. Jon followed. The great wooden doors loomed ahead, barred and heavy, but one's massive fists struck them again and again until they splintered. Bolts flew from the walls, piercing the giant's flesh, but he did not stop until the gates burst inward. Ramsay loosed one final arrow into the giant's eye, and the mighty creature fell to his knees, dead before he struck the ground. Jon stepped through the ruined gate, his eyes fixed on Ramsay, who waited within the courtyard, calm as ever, bow in hand. Ramsay smiled. "You wanted me, bastard?" Jon dropped his sword. "I'm coming for you." The first arrow came fast, But Jon raised a shield, the shaft splintering against it. The second struck the wood, then the third. Before Ramsay could knock another, Jon was upon him. He struck once, twice again, his fists raining down like hammer blows, breaking bone, breaking the smirk from Ramsay's face. The snow beneath them turned red once more. When it was done, Jon rose, chest heaving. Ramsay lay beaten but alive, his cruelty at last powerless. Sansa entered the courtyard, her eyes meeting Jon's. She said nothing. She only looked down at the fallen man who had once been her tormentor. Jon turned away. "He's yours." And so Ramsay Bolton was taken to the kennels, the same place where he had fed his hounds with the flesh of men. Sansa stood before him, silent, as he laughed through broken teeth. "They're loyal," he said. "My hounds will never harm me." But hunger is stronger than loyalty. When Sansa left the kennels, the laughter had turned to screams, and then to silence. Outside, the banners of the flayed man burned, and the dire wolf of House Stark rose once more above Winterfell. Snow fell softly over the courtyard, covering the blood, the bodies, the scars of war. The North remembered, and in that cold, quiet dawn, the bastard of Winterfell was no more. The Starks had come home. Dawn came gray and cold over Winterfell. The fires of the battle still smoldered in the courtyards, thin ribbons of smoke rising to meet the low northern sky. Snow drifted through the broken gate where the giant had fallen, blanketing the wreckage, softening the memory of blood. Jon Snow stood upon the battlements, his cloak torn and stiff with frost, watching as the dead were carried from the field. The wind tugged at his hair, whispering across the stones like a voice from another age. The victory had come, yet it brought no peace. Below, men worked in silence, wildlings beside Northmen burning the fallen. The smoke stung the eyes and clung to the air, heavy with the scent of ash and sorrow. Tormund Giantsbane limped among them, barking orders, his arm bound in blood-soaked linen. He caught Jon's gaze and gave a weary nod. The battle was done, but the cost would not be forgotten. Jon descended the tower steps slowly, his boots echoing through the halls. The once proud corridors of Winterfell bore the scars of war, splintered doors, shattered stone, the dark stains of struggle. Yet beneath it all, the castle still breathed. The heart of the North endured. In the great hall, the direwolf banners had been hung again, their white sigils stark against the gray walls. Davos Seaworth stood near the hearth, warming his hands above the flame. He looked up as Jon entered. "It's a hard-won thing," Davos said quietly, "but it's won all the same." Jon nodded. "Aye, harder than any I've known." There was a pause before Davos spoke again. "Your sister waits for you, in the Godswood." Jon hesitated. The Godswood had always been a place of peace, but after the blood that had been spilled, he wondered if even the old gods could forgive what had been done in their name. Still, he went. The snow in the Godswood lay untouched, pure and unbroken. The red leaves of the weirwood whispered softly as the wind passed through them. Beneath its ancient branches stood Sansa, her cloak drawn close, her breath rising in pale clouds. She did not turn as he approached. "It's strange," she said. "All my life I dreamed of coming home, and now that I'm here, it feels different, smaller, colder." Jon stopped beside her, his eyes tracing the carved face in the heart tree. Its eyes wept red sap like blood. "It's not the same home we left." "No," she said, "and we're not the same people." For a time, they stood in silence. The wind stirred the snow, and the faint sound of the pyres reached them from the courtyard. "He got what he deserved," Jon said at last. Sansa's eyes flicked toward him, unreadable. Did he? Jon turned to face her fully. You let his hounds tear him apart. They were his own beasts, she said coldly. He starved them for 7 days. He thought they'd remember his voice. Her lips trembled, but her voice did not falter. They remembered hunger instead. Jon searched her face for remorse, but found only a hard, quiet resolve. She had been broken and remade by cruelty, and what remained was stronger than iron. Ramsay's dead, she continued, her voice softer now. But there will always be more like him. Men who think kindness is weakness. Men who burn and flay and take what isn't theirs. The North is full of them. Jon's jaw tightened. Then we'll face them, together. Sansa's gaze lingered on him for a moment, then drifted to the heart tree once more. Together, she echoed, though something in her tone carried the weight of uncertainty. A raven's cry cut through the stillness. The bird swooped low, landing upon a branch above the weirwood. It bore a small scroll tied to its leg. Jon reached for it and broke the seal. The parchment was marked with the sigil of a direwolf. Inside, in the hand of a maester, were words that chilled him more than the northern wind ever could. The wall is not safe. The dead march south. He read it twice, then looked up to Sansa. It's from Castle Black. What does it say? Jon's voice was low, steady, despite the dread coiling in his chest. The White Walkers. They're coming. Sansa's breath caught. For a long moment, neither spoke. Beyond the walls of Winterfell, the snow fell thicker, as though the land itself had heard the warning. At last, she said, "We've just won our home back. Will we have to fight again so soon?" Jon folded the letter. If the dead are marching, there'll be no peace for anyone. Not in the north. Not anywhere. They left the Godswood together, their footsteps muffled in the snow. In the great hall, the fires burned low, and the banners of House Stark swayed gently in the draught. The sound of ravens echoed faintly from the rookery above, restless and uneasy. By nightfall, Jon gathered his commanders in the hall, Davos, Tormund, and what northern lords remained loyal. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and damp wool. "The wall stands," Jon said, "but it won't hold forever. The Night King commands an army of the dead. Thousands, tens of thousands. When they come, no castle will stand unless we stand together." Lord Glover slammed his fist on the table. "We've just buried our sons. We can't march to another war." "And if you don't," Tormund growled, "then your sons will rise again and fight for the Night King." A murmur of fear swept through the room. Davos placed a hand on the table, his voice calm but carrying weight. "You saw what happened here. You know what happens when the North stands divided. If the dead come, you'll wish for a battle like this one." Jon looked at the faces around him, hard men, scarred and weary, yet bound by the same cold land. "The North remembers," he said softly. "We will not kneel, not to a southern crown, not to the dead." The words hung in the air like a vow. One by one, the lords of the North rose and bent the knee. "To the King in the North!" cried Lady Mormont, small but fierce, her voice echoing through the hall. "To the King in the North!" the others roared, their voices swelling until the stones themselves seemed to tremble. Jon felt the weight of their trust settle upon his shoulders, a crown heavier than steel. He had not sought it, but it had found him all the same. As the cheers faded, he turned to the window. The snow fell thick and unending, each flake a whisper of the long night to come. Beyond the walls, far to the north, unseen and unending, the darkness stirred, and in the frozen silence of the far north, the dead began to march, The wind howled over the battlements of Winterfell, carrying with it the bitter promise of the coming storm. The fires had burned low in the great hall, and most of the men slept, though few slept well. Outside, the snow fell thicker each hour, the flakes twisting in strange, silent patterns, as if drawn by unseen hands. Jon Snow did not sleep at all. He stood upon the ramparts, the hood of his cloak drawn up, watching the dark horizon. The message from the wall weighed heavily upon his heart. The dead marched. The words echoed through his mind again and again, as steady and merciless as the beating of his pulse. In the courtyard below, the castle stirred. Black-cloaked men from the night's watch had come through the morning mist, their faces pale from cold and exhaustion. Jon went down to meet them, his boots crunching through the snow. The leader was a young man, scarcely more than 20, with a scar that crossed his cheek. He saluted with the rigid discipline of a soldier. "Your Grace," he said, his voice hoarse. "I bring word from Castle Black." Jon's heart tightened at the title. Your Grace. It still felt strange upon him, a crown he had never desired. "Speak." "The dead attacked Eastwatch by the sea," the man said. "The Night King was there. The wall still stands, but not for long. The cold itself moves with them. Every night, they come closer." Jon closed his eyes briefly. "How many men remain at the wall?" "Fewer than 500, my lord. The rest are gone, slain or turned." A silence fell. Only the wind moved between them. At last, Jon said, "You've done well to bring this warning. Rest now. You'll have food and shelter here." When the messenger was gone, Jon lingered in the courtyard. The weight of the crown, invisible though it was, pressed upon him. He could almost hear the whisper of the dead beyond the snowfields. Soft, relentless, patient. Later that day, Sansa found him in the great hall, standing by the hearth. The flames cast long shadows across the stone floor. "You've heard from the wall?" she said, reading his expression before he could answer. He nodded. "It's worse than I feared?" She studied him quietly, her blue eyes steady and sharp. "Then we must call the bannermen again." "They've just buried their dead," Jon replied. "If I ask them to fight another war, there will be none left to answer." "Then find another way," she said. "The North is ours now. Winterfell is ours. We have to hold it." Jon turned toward the fire, the heat doing little to ease the cold within him. "You think I don't know that? Every choice I make now will cost lives. If I lead them against the dead, many will fall. If I do nothing, all will fall." Sansa said nothing for a moment. The firelight caught the edge of her hair, glinting like copper beneath the shadows. "There's another choice," she said finally. "The South." Jon looked up sharply. "You'd have me bend the knee?" "I'd have you survive," she answered. "Daenerys Targaryen rules in the South. Her dragons can burn armies to ash. If she is truly as strong as the tales say, perhaps she can stand against the dead." Jon frowned. "I know what she is. I've heard the stories too. Fire made flesh. But dragons won't save us unless she chooses to fight for more than her crown." "Then make her choose," Sansa said. "The North cannot stand alone." Her words lingered long after she left the hall. Jon stared into the flames until the wood collapsed in a shower of sparks. Fire and ice, two sides of a coin that would soon collide. By the next morning, the decision was made. Winterfell buzzed with the restless stir of preparation. Horses were saddled, ravens sent. Jon would ride south to meet the Dragon Queen, while Sansa would rule in his stead. Before he departed, Jon walked once more through the Godswood. The heart tree loomed tall and silent, its red leaves drifting to the snow like drops of blood. He knelt before it, resting his gloved hand against the rough bark. "Father," he murmured, "if you can hear me, give me strength. The North needs more than steel now. It needs hope." The wind stirred the branches, whispering faintly through the leaves. For a moment, Jon could almost imagine a voice within the rustle, distant, familiar, solemn. "Winter is coming." He rose, feeling the words settle in his chest like a vow renewed. When he rode from Winterfell, the castle lay behind him in quiet majesty, its towers shrouded in mist. Beside him rode Davos, wrapped in his heavy cloak, his face grim. "You're sure of this, then?" Davos asked as they passed beyond the gates. Jon nodded. "The North cannot win this war alone. If the Dragon Queen will stand with us, perhaps there's a chance. And if she won't, then we fight alone," Jon said. "But I won't let our people burn while there's still a chance to stop it." They rode south through forests heavy with snow, through valleys where the rivers ran dark and half-frozen. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting. By the fourth day, they reached the ruins of Moat Cailin, its towers rising from the marshes like the bones of dead giants. From there, they pressed onward into the lands of the Neck, where the air grew warmer and the snow gave way to mud. As they rode, Jon spoke little, lost in thought. Each night, he dreamed of fire, of dragons flying over fields of ash, of blue eyes burning in the darkness. He awoke each time with the same chill in his chest, as though part of the dream had followed him back into waking. On the 10th day, they came to the banks of the Trident, where a small camp awaited them, men wearing no banners but armed well enough to be soldiers. A man stepped forward, tall and lean, his silver hair tied back. "I am Ser Jorah Mormont," he said, bowing slightly. "The Queen sent me to escort you to Dragonstone." Jon studied him. "Your house is of the North." "Aye," said Jorah, "and my Queen would see the North stand with her." Jon glanced at Davos. "Then we ride for Dragonstone." The journey to the sea took 3 more days. The coastline rose before them like a jagged blade, waves crashing against black stone cliffs. And there, high upon its rocky island, stood the fortress of Dragonstone, its towers dark against the setting sun. As their boat approached, the sky filled with the beating of wings. The sound was unlike anything Jon had ever heard, deep, thunderous, alive. A shadow swept across the deck, vast and terrible. A dragon passed overhead, its scales glinted gold and red in the light, its wings spanning half the sky. Another followed, darker, fiercer. The men aboard the ship fell silent, some dropping to their knees. Jon did not kneel. He only watched, awe and dread warring in his chest. Fire and ice, he thought again. 2 powers the world was never meant to hold at once. The dragons circled once and vanished into the clouds above the castle. The sea roared around them as the ship neared the shore. And upon the black steps of Dragonstone, waiting with the wind whipping her silver hair, stood Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, the mother of dragons, breaker of chains, queen of fire. Jon Snow had come to meet her. The war for the dawn had begun. The black stones of Dragonstone were older than memory. They rose from the sea like the spines of some sleeping beast, carved by wind and time and the hands of men who had come before even the first men. Storms rolled endlessly over its cliffs, lightning crawling across the sky like pale fire. Jon Snow stood upon the shore, salt spray on his face, as the sea roared behind him. He could feel the weight of history here, the power that once ruled the world from this place. The waves that beat against the rocks seemed to echo the heartbeat of something vast and ancient. Beside him, Sir Devos Seaworth adjusted his cloak and muttered, "I've known my share of queens, but this one comes with dragons." Jon gave a faint smile, though it did not reach his eyes. "Then let's hope she's more friend than fire." They climbed the steep path that wound toward the castle gates. The air smelled of ash and sea salt, and gulls wheeled overhead, their cries lost in the wind. The soldiers who met them were stern-faced and silent, bearing spears tipped with dragon glass. Within the courtyard, torches flickered, casting shifting light upon walls carved with dragons, wings unfurled, eyes blazing. And at the far end of the hall, upon a throne of dark stone, sat Daenerys Targaryen. She was younger than Jon expected, yet there was nothing soft about her. Her hair, pale as moonlight, fell loose about her shoulders, and her eyes, violet, keen, and unwavering, studied him like a hawk watches prey. "Jon Snow," she said, her voice smooth as silk and edged with command. "King in the North." Jon bowed slightly, neither kneeling nor defiant. "Your Grace, thank you for receiving me." "You are here to pledge your allegiance," she said simply. "The North will join me in restoring the Seven Kingdoms to their rightful ruler." "I am here," Jon answered, "to ask for your help. The dead are coming, Your Grace. Not from the south, nor from any throne, but from beyond the wall. An army of the dead marches on the living." Her brow arched slightly, the faintest hint of skepticism in her gaze. "The tales of your North are full of such things, giants, demons, cold spirits in the snow. Do you mean to frighten me with old songs?" Jon's voice did not waver. "You'll see the truth soon enough if we don't stop them. When they come, thrones and crowns won't matter. Only life will." A murmur rippled through her council. Tyrion Lannister, standing at the Queen's side, gave a dry smile. "Forgive him, Your Grace. Northern men are not known for their diplomacy." Daenerys turned to him with a faint smirk before looking back to Jon. "And what do you offer, King in the North, in exchange for my help?" "Dragonglass," he said. "You have mountains of it here beneath Dragonstone. It kills the dead. Let me mine it. Let me arm my people." She regarded him in silence for a long moment. "You come to me with talk of dead men and frozen demons," she said at last, "and ask for my resources, my land, and yet you offer no fealty." Jon met her gaze steadily. "I was chosen king in the North by the men and women who bled to win it back. I will not ask them to kneel for a war they do not yet understand." Daenerys rose from her throne. "Then perhaps you should make them understand. I was born to rule the Seven Kingdoms, and I will, with fire and blood if I must." For a heartbeat, the air between them seemed to crackle, a tension as sharp as drawn steel. Then Tyrion stepped forward, his tone smooth. "Perhaps we might begin with something less final than fire and blood. The King in the North asks for dragonglass, Your Grace, not crowns, not armies. A gesture of good faith, perhaps?" Daenerys' gaze flickered toward him, then back to Jon. At length, she nodded. "Very well. You may mine the dragonglass. I will not stand idle while the North faces ruin, if ruin truly comes." Jon inclined his head. "Thank you, Your Grace." Their eyes met again, ice and fire, distrust and respect, bound by necessity. The war between them, silent though it was, had begun. In the days that followed, the halls of Dragonstone filled with uneasy cooperation. Jon oversaw the mining of dragonglass beneath the cliffs, working alongside men who once feared his name. The veins of black crystal glowed faintly in torchlight, their sharp edges gleaming like frozen night. At times, he caught sight of Daenerys walking the battlements above, the wind tugging at her silver hair. She often looked eastward, toward the sea, as though listening for some distant call. One evening, she came to the caves where Jon worked. The light from the torches danced across the walls, revealing ancient carvings, marks left by the children of the forest, figures of men and white walkers locked in endless battle. They fought together once, Jon said quietly, his voice echoing in the cavern. The first men and the children, against the dead. They set aside their hatred because they had to. Daenerys traced one of the carvings with her fingers, her expression unreadable. And you think we must do the same? I don't think, Jon said. I know. She turned to face him. And when it's done, when the dead are defeated, what then? Will the North stand apart again, alone behind its snow? Jon's jaw tightened. If we survive, we can talk of crowns. Until then, there's only one enemy. For a moment, her gaze softened. You are unlike the men I have known, she said. Most come to me speaking of loyalty and power. You speak of survival. Jon met her eyes. Because I've seen what death truly is. It's not politics. It's not ambition. It's endless night. A sound split the air above them, a roar, vast and terrible. They stepped from the cave just as the dragons swept low over the cliffs, their wings stirring the air into wild gusts. Daenerys looked up, her face lit by the orange glow of dragonfire. They are my children, she said, fire made flesh. Jon watched the beasts wheel through the sky, their shadows vast against the fading sun. They may be our only hope. Daenerys turned to him. And you, King in the North? What are you? He hesitated, the truth half formed on his tongue. A man who's died once already. Her eyes widened slightly, the faintest hint of disbelief. But before she could ask more, the horns sounded from the walls above. A ship had been sighted on the horizon, its sails black as pitch, its prow carved in the shape of a kraken. Jon felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. The Greyjoys, Davos murmured, coming to stand beside him. No good ever rides under that banner. As the ship drew closer, the sea roared louder, and thunder rolled once more over Dragonstone. The storm was coming again, this time not of ice nor of fire, but of men and ambition and betrayal. And Jon Snow knew as he stood beside the Dragon Queen that the true war had only just begun. The storm broke over Dragonstone that night with the fury of the gods themselves. Lightning clawed across the heavens, thunder cracked over the waves, and rain lashed the castle like 1,000 whips. The sea boiled beneath the cliffs, white foam surging against the rocks. Jon Snow stood within the great hall, the roar of the tempest echoing through the walls. The black banners of House Targaryen, three-headed dragon, red on black, snapped in the wind that tore through the open doors. Beyond the rain, torches burned upon the docks, where the ship of the Ironborn had come to anchor. From that ship stepped Theon Greyjoy, cloaked in soaked leather, his face pale with exhaustion. His men followed close behind, lean and hard-eyed, their armor dull with salt and rust. He paused before Jon, bowing his head. "Jon Snow," he said hoarsely, "King in the North." Jon's expression did not soften. "Theon Greyjoy, I never thought to see you again." "I've done much I wish I hadn't," Theon replied, his voice low, "and paid for more than I can count." Jon stepped closer. "You betrayed my family. You took Winterfell, killed the men who served my father, and left our home in ruins." "I know what I did," Theon said. The rain dripped from his hair into his eyes, but he did not look away. "And I'll never be clean of it. But Sansa, your sister, she trusted me. I brought her safely from Ramsay Bolton's hounds. If not for that, she'd be dead. Jon's hand flexed at his side, the weight of Longclaw heavy on his belt. The hall had fallen silent, but for the storm outside. The torches flickered in the wind, casting shadows that moved like ghosts across the walls. At last, Jon spoke. "You saved her. That's the only reason I don't kill you where you stand." Theon nodded slowly. "I wouldn't blame you if you did." Before more could be said, the heavy doors at the far end of the hall swung open. Daenerys Targaryen entered, flanked by Ser Jorah and Tyrion Lannister. Her silver hair gleamed in the firelight, and her eyes fell upon Theon with calm curiosity. "Lord Greyjoy," she said, "you come uninvited to my island. What is it you seek?" Theon dropped to one knee. "Your Grace, I come seeking your aid. My sister Yara was taken by Euron Greyjoy, our uncle. He's sworn his fleet to Cersei Lannister. He means to rule the seas and crush all who stand against her." Daenerys's gaze sharpened. "So the Queen of the South gathers allies while I stand idle. Tell me, why should I trust a Greyjoy?" Theon lifted his head. "Because Yara fought for you before any other. She brought her ships to your cause when all the Iron Islands followed Euron. She's loyal, and she'll die if we don't act." Tyrion's voice was measured, thoughtful. "Euron's fleet is vast, too vast to challenge openly." Daenerys turned to him. "And yet if we allow him to strike first, we lose the sea entirely." Jon listened in silence. War between queens meant little beside the shadow gathering in the north, yet he saw the truth of it. If Daenerys' fleet was broken, the fight against the dead would die before it began. When the council had spoken their fill, Daenerys dismissed them all but Jon. The hall emptied until only the sound of rain remained. "You think I should help him?" she said, her voice quiet. "I think you need allies," Jon replied. "The Greyjoy girl stood by you when few others did. If saving her means gaining her fleet, it's worth the risk." Daenerys regarded him in silence, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "You speak as if you've worn a crown longer than I have." Jon almost smiled. "I've worn one long enough to know that every ally costs something." Her gaze lingered on him. "And what of you, King in the North? What will you give when the cost comes due?" He did not answer, for outside a new sound split the storm, the deep, thunderous roar of a dragon. The hall trembled as Drogon swept low over the castle, his wings vast enough to darken the torches. The creature landed upon the cliffs, its breath hissing steam into the rain. Daenerys stepped to the open door, the storm tugging at her cloak. The dragon's black eyes fixed upon her, and for a heartbeat, the fury of the storm itself seemed to bow to her will. She looked back at Jon, her face solemn. "Tomorrow, we sail for the Ironborn," she said. "If we are to win the world, we must start by taking the sea." The storm eased by morning, leaving the air heavy with salt and mist. The fleet gathered in the bay, ships bearing the sigil of the dragon beside those of the kraken. Sails swelled in the wind as crews shouted, and the sea churned beneath their keels. Jon stood upon the deck beside Daenerys, the chill wind tugging at his cloak. "You've commanded armies before," she said, watching the horizon. "But have you ever sailed into war?" "Not like this," Jon admitted. "The sea doesn't forgive mistakes." "No," Daenerys said softly. "It never does." As they sailed, the dragons wheeled above the ships, their shadows passing over the waves. The men below looked up in awe and fear, for few in this world had ever seen such creatures and lived. By nightfall, they reached the open waters where the Iron Fleet prowled. Lanterns flickered in the distance like stars upon the sea, each one marking an enemy ship. The first attack came with the rising moon. Arrows streaked through the darkness, burning at their tips. One struck the mainmast of a nearby vessel, setting it ablaze. The sea exploded with sound, horns, shouts, the crash of wood against wood. Euron Greyjoy's fleet had found them. Jon drew his sword as grappling hooks clanged against the rails. Ironborn clambered aboard, their faces smeared with salt and soot, their axes flashing in the torchlight. The deck became a blur of steel and fire. Drogon roared above, unleashing a torrent of flame that turned the sea to gold. Ships burned, their sails collapsing into embers. But even dragons could not be everywhere at once. Jon fought beside Davos, parrying an axe and driving Longclaw through his foe's chest. The spray of seawater mingled with blood, the air thick with smoke and the reek of pitch. Through the chaos, Jon saw Daenerys upon the upper deck, the firelight reflected in her eyes. She stood tall despite the storm, her voice rising above the din, a command not of fear, but of fury. The dragons answered. Rhaegal swooped low, his green wings tearing through the smoke. The blast of his flame engulfed the enemy's flagship, its mast collapsing in a shower of sparks. Still, Euron's ships pressed closer, relentless. He was a madman, laughing as fire rained upon his men, steering his vessel straight toward the queens. Jon shouted a warning, but it was drowned by the crash of waves and the scream of steel. The ships collided with a splintering roar. The impact threw Jon to the deck. When he rose, the world was chaos. Men shouting, dragons roaring, and through the smoke, the glint of armor as Euron Greyjoy himself leapt aboard. His smile was madness given flesh. "Come then, Snow," he roared. "Let's see what kind of bastard you truly are." The decks burned around them as they met in a storm of blades, and somewhere above, through flame and smoke, the dragons cried out, voices of fire against the endless dark sea. The sea raged as though the gods themselves were warring beneath its surface. Fire danced upon the waves, and the smoke of burning ships rose like black banners to the storm-torn sky. The crash of steel and the cries of men blended into one endless roar. Jon Snow fought upon the slick deck, Longclaw flashing in the firelight. Every strike was met with the clash of iron and the hiss of rain. Around him, bodies fell, swallowed by the dark sea or crushed beneath shattered timbers. The air stank of pitch and blood. Euron Greyjoy moved through the chaos like a creature born of the storm, his coat of black leather dripping seawater, his one good eye burning with wild glee. He laughed as he fought, a sound more terrible than the thunder itself. His axe swept wide, cleaving through two men who stood between him and his prey. "Come, bastard of Winterfell," he shouted, his voice cutting through the tempest. "You've tasted death once. Let me send you to meet it again." Jon steadied his breath and advanced, boots slipping on the wet planks. Euron's axe came down in a blur of steel, and Jon turned it aside, the shock of the blow shuddering up his arm. They circled one another amidst the wreckage, fire glinting in their eyes. "You fight for a queen who burned cities," Euron sneered, parrying a strike. "What will she do with the North when the war is done? Freeze it? Rule it from her throne of ash?" Jon did not answer. He struck again, hard and fast, forcing Euron back toward the rail. But the sea favored the Ironborn. A wave struck the ship's side, rocking it violently. Euron lunged, catching Jon's shoulder with the edge of his axe. Pain flared hot through Jon's arm, but he turned with the blow, driving his sword into Euron's side. The Ironborn captain staggered back, blood staining his shirt, but still he laughed. "A good cut, Snow. You almost make me believe the North breeds men worth fearing." He raised his axe again, but the ship lurched as Drogon's shadow swept over them. A heartbeat later, fire fell from the heavens. The deck erupted in flame. Men screamed as they burned, their cries lost in the thunder. Jon was thrown against the mast, the heat searing his skin. When his vision cleared, Euron was gone, cast overboard or vanished into the smoke. The ship was dying. Its masts had become pillars of fire, its hull breaking apart beneath the waves. Jon staggered to his feet, searching for Daenerys through the haze. He saw her at the far end of the deck, shouting commands, her hair whipping wild in the storm. Drogon roared above her, his great wings stirring the smoke. "Jon!" Davos's voice cut through the chaos. The Onion Knight stood by the railing, waving toward a smaller vessel pulling alongside. "We have to go!" Jon ran, dodging the flames that leapt like living things. As he reached Daenerys, he seized her arm. "The ship's finished. Come!" She hesitated, gaze fixed on the burning sea. "Not while my men—" A thunderous crack cut her words short as the mast splintered and fell. Jon pulled her aside just in time, the flaming timber crashing where she had stood. He dragged her toward the waiting boat. Drogon shrieked overhead, his eyes blazing with fury. For a moment, Jon feared the beast would unleash his fire upon the sea itself, but Daenerys turned, shouting in the ancient tongue of Valyria, and the dragon wheeled away into the clouds. They leapt into the smaller ship just as the flagship sank, swallowed by the storm. The oarsmen rowed with desperate strength, driving them through burning wreckage and bodies that floated like shadows upon the waves. When at last they broke free of the battle, the sea stretched dark and endless around them. The rain still fell, but the wind had begun to fade. Behind them, the fires of war flickered upon the horizon, red ghosts in the night. Daenerys sat at the bow, her face pale beneath the flickering light. The salt wind clung to her hair, and her eyes, those strange violet eyes, were hard and distant. Jon joined her, his arm bound with a strip of torn cloth. For a long time, neither spoke. The only sound was the creak of the oars and the hiss of the sea. At last she said, "We lost half the fleet. Many more burned." Jon nodded. "And Euron?" "Dead, I hope," she said softly. "But men like him are hard to kill." He looked out across the dark water. "If he lives, he'll go to Cersei. She'll use him against you." "She already has," Daenerys replied, her voice low. "But she's made a mistake if she thinks dragons can be chained by gold or fear." There was a fire in her tone that unsettled Jon. It reminded him of Melisandre's voice when she had spoken of her god. Burning, fervent, absolute. "You can't fight two wars at once," he said. "The living first, the dead after, or none of us will live to see the end." She turned to him. "And what would you have me do? Bow to a corpse queen while I wait for monsters in the snow?" "I'd have you fight the war that matters," he said quietly. "The one that decides whether there's a world left for your throne." The sea wind filled the silence between them. Finally, Daenerys rose and walked to the stern, her cloak billowing behind her. "You speak of death as if it's something you know," she said without turning. Jon's hand tightened on the railing. "I do." When she faced him again, there was a shadow of curiosity in her eyes. What kind of man dies and still breathes? He met her gaze steadily. The kind who knows time is running out. By the next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the sea calm and gray. They found refuge upon a barren island of rock and grass where the remnants of their fleet gathered. Smoke still rose from distant wrecks upon the horizon. Among the survivors was Theon Greyjoy, battered and half-drowned, clinging to life. When Jon found him, Theon knelt in the surf, shivering, his eyes hollow. Yara? Jon asked. Taken, Theon whispered. Euron has her. He means to break her as he did me. Jon looked down at him, the waves washing against his boots. Then go after her, he said. Do what's right, even if it kills you. Theon raised his eyes, and for the first time in years, something like resolve burned within them. When Jon left him there, he climbed the ridge overlooking the sea. Daenerys stood at its crest, the wind whipping her cloak. Above her, 2 dragons circled, their cries echoing across the barren sky. Jon joined her, gazing northward. The air was cold and clear, and far beyond the horizon lay the wall, the place where his life had begun, and where it might yet end. Winter is here, he said. Daenerys' eyes followed his. Then let it come, she whispered. Let the world see what fire can do to ice. Jon said nothing. The wind stirred, carrying the distant sound of the waves crashing below. And in that sound, faint and terrible, he thought he heard another echo, one that did not belong to the sea at all, a sound like the whisper of endless night. The dead were marching still. The chill of dawn lay heavy upon the sea when Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen returned to Dragonstone. The surviving ships limped into the bay, their sails tattered and blackened from flame. The harbor, once filled with proud banners and the smell of salt and fire, now lay silent save for the cawing of gulls circling above the wrecks. Jon stood upon the docks, watching as the wounded were carried ashore. Smoke still drifted from the decks of the shattered ships, and the tide brought pieces of wood and armor back to the sand. He had seen war before, seen men die by sword, by fire, and by cold, but the sea held its own kind of cruelty. It swallowed the fallen whole and left no graves behind. Daenerys walked among the wounded, her face calm, though her eyes betrayed the storm within. Men bowed as she passed, calling her Misa, their voices hoarse from smoke. She paused often, offering water, comfort, a touch to a fevered brow. Yet her gaze would always drift to the horizon, where the sun rose pale and cold over the waves. When Jon approached, she did not turn. Half my fleet lies at the bottom of the sea, she said softly, and the rest may never sail again. Euron Greyjoy has struck a blow I will not soon forget. He's made an enemy of dragons, Jon said. She glanced at him then, her expression unreadable. Dragons burn many things, Jon Snow. Ships, armies, cities. Her gaze drifted back to the horizon. Sometimes they burn more than their enemies. Jon studied her in silence. The sea wind tugged at her hair, the same wind that carried the faint cries of the wounded. You've lost much, he said, but you still have more power than any ruler in Westeros. 3 dragons, 2 armies, and the loyalty of men who would die for you. Power means nothing if I cannot use it, she said. The Iron Throne is no closer, and the North still stands apart. Jon hesitated. The throne won't matter if the dead cross the wall. Daenerys turned toward him fully then, her eyes sharp as glass. You speak of death as though it were a kingdom greater than mine. Do you truly believe this threat of yours will reach even here? I've seen them, Jon said. I've fought them. They're not a tale told to frighten children. They're coming for us all. Her voice softened, though doubt lingered within it. Then show me. Prove to me the dead walk, and I will fight beside you. He met her gaze. I can't bring one of the dead across the sea, but I can show you where they come from. Her eyes narrowed. You would have me ride beyond the wall? No, Jon said. I'll go myself. I'll bring you proof. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Daenerys said quietly, If you go north again, you may not return. Jon smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. "I've been dead once already. The gods won't take me so easily the second time." The ravens flew from Dragonstone within the hour. Letters went to the north, to Winterfell, to the Wall itself. Jon's companions would gather there, men he trusted and some he did not. They would ride beyond the Wall and bring back one of the dead. That night, the castle grew still. The sea whispered below the cliffs, and the dragons slept upon the rocks, their wings folded tight. Jon stood alone in the war room, staring down at the great carved table. The painted map of Westeros stretched before him, marked with tokens for armies and fleets that had already burned. Daenerys entered quietly. She had changed from her armor into a gown of dark blue silk, though she looked no less regal. "You mean to leave at first light?" she said. It was not a question. "I do." She moved closer, her fingers tracing the edges of the map. "You remind me of my brother Rhaegar," she said softly. "He was said to be brave and foolish in equal measure." Jon gave a small, wry smile. "I've been called both." For a heartbeat, the air between them was still. Then she said, "If you die beyond the Wall, the North will fall without a fight. Your people need you alive." "They need to live, not just fight," he replied. "And no wall of ice will keep death out forever." She studied him in silence, her expression softer now. "When you return," she said finally, "we'll speak again, of alliances, of the war to come, perhaps of more than that." Jon inclined his head, uncertain how to answer. He turned to leave, but her hand caught his arm. The touch was brief, almost hesitant. "The North is not the only place that remembers," she said. Their eyes met once more. Then Jon stepped away, his cloak stirring behind him as he left the hall. 2 days later, Jon and his companions reached Eastwatch by the sea. The Wall loomed above them, immense, ancient, and silent. Its frozen face shimmered blue in the pale light, a wall not merely of ice, but of time itself. Tormund Giantsbane greeted Jon with a grin that did not reach his eyes. "You've a gift for finding trouble, Snow. I thought the dead would have eaten you by now." "Give them time," Jon said. Together, they climbed to the top of the wall, where the wind cut like knives. From that height, the world stretched out before them in shades of white and gray. Beyond the wall lay endless tundra, scattered forests, and the faint glimmer of movement far to the north, too distant to name, yet heavy with menace. "You sure about this?" Tormund asked. "You're going to march into the land of the dead to bring one back? That's madness, even for you." Jon looked out across the frozen waste. "Madness is what's left when reason fails." Below, the others gathered. Jorah Mormont, grim and silent beside Gendry Waters, the blacksmith's hammer strapped to his back. The Hound stood apart, staring northward, his face half-shadowed. And with them came a handful of the Brotherhood without banners, men who spoke of gods and destiny, their faith burning brighter than their fear. Beric Dondarrion greeted Jon with a solemn nod. "You've died once, Lord Snow. Perhaps the Lord of Light means for you to walk in death's shadow again." Jon did not answer. He looked instead to the horizon, where the pale sun was sinking behind the mountains. When night fell, they rode out through the gate. The wall's shadow swallowed them whole. Snow drifted thick around them, muffling the world in silence. Each breath hung white in the air, and each step of their horses sounded like the tolling of a slow, distant bell. For days they traveled north, through frozen rivers and empty valleys. Once they crossed the ruins of a wildling village, the huts half buried in snow, the doors torn from their hinges. No living thing stirred there, only silence, vast and watchful. It was on the fourth day that they found the first sign. A shape moved on the ridge ahead, tall and thin, its limbs wrong, its gait too smooth for a man. Then another appeared, and another, until the ridge was crowned with pale figures, eyes like blue fire, faces like carved ice. "The dead," whispered Gendry. Jon drew Longclaw. The Valyrian steel shimmered faintly in the gray light. "We take one," he said. "No more." The others readied their weapons, and as the first shriek tore through the air, a sound like the wind through a graveyard, Jon Snow realized the dead had found them first. The hunt beyond the wall had begun. The wind keened like a living thing, tearing at cloaks and faces, filling the frozen wilderness with its hollow cry. The sky was the color of iron, the snow a white void stretching to the ends of the earth. Jon Snow rode at the head of the company, his eyes fixed upon the distant ridge where the shapes of the dead had appeared. Behind him came his companions, their breath steaming in the air. Tormund, broad as a bear and twice as fierce. Jorah Mormont, calm as Winterstone. Beric Dondarrion with his flaming sword and quiet faith. The Hound, muttering curses to the gods and wind alike. And Gendry, the blacksmith's bastard, his hammer slung across his back. The night had fallen thick and cold. The wind scoured their faces raw, carrying with it the faint sound of creaking ice, like bones shifting beneath the snow. "They're close," said Tormund, his voice low. "I can smell them." Jon nodded. "We move quietly. If we're to take one, we can't draw them all." They dismounted and advanced on foot, their boots sinking deep into the drifts. The world was silent save for the crunch of snow and the rasp of steel. Each man carried fire, torches, flaming swords, even a few jars of pitch that crackled with frost. From the ridge above came the faint crack of something heavy moving through the ice. Jon raised his hand. The group halted. For a long moment, they waited. Breath held. Then a figure appeared through the storm. It moved like a man, yet its flesh was pale as milk, its eyes burning with the cold blue light of the grave. Its armor was rimed with frost, its blade shimmering with a pale, ghostly hue. A white walker. Jon's heart hammered in his chest. "Remember the plan," he said softly. Beric's sword flared with fire, casting long shadows across the snow. "May the Lord of Light guide our hands," he murmured. The creature turned toward them, its gaze like ice upon their flesh. Then it shrieked, a sound that split the night and echoed through the hills. The dead answered. From the darkness they came, scores of them, their limbs stiff and broken, their eyes blue with frozen fire. They moved with terrible grace, silent and unstoppable, a tide of death sweeping across the snow. "Now!" Jon shouted. They met the charge in a storm of fire and steel. The Hound swung his great sword, cleaving through the first white that reached him. Gendry's hammer crushed skulls like ice. Tormund roared, his axe rising and falling in furious rhythm. Jon's blade struck a walker's sword, and for a moment, the world seemed to freeze around them. When Longclaw met the blade of ice, it shattered in a burst of frost. Jon stepped forward and cut deep into the creature's chest. It fell without a sound, its body breaking into shards that melted into the snow. But as the walker fell, a dozen of the whites collapsed with it, their reanimated bodies crumbling into stillness. "That's it!" Jon called. "Kill the one who commands them!" Another walker advanced, its spear raised. Jorah met it head-on, his sword flashing. The two circled, the air alive with frost and flame. When their weapons met, sparks scattered like starlight. With a final blow, Jorah struck true. The walker's body shattered, its scream fading into the storm. But the dead were endless. For everyone that fell, 2 more rose. "We need one alive," Jon shouted. "We can't kill them all." Tormund bellowed something in the old tongue and threw his axe, striking down another wight that clawed too close. "Alive," he says. "You try catching one." Still, fortune turned. From the chaos, one wight stumbled free of its master's control, snarling and clawing at the air. Jon and Beric lunged, tackling it into the snow. The creature fought with inhuman strength, shrieking as they bound its hands in iron chain. "Got it!" Beric shouted. But the sound carried. The others had heard. The horizon itself seemed to move. An army of the dead, ranks upon ranks, their numbers lost to the dark. "Run!" Jon roared. They turned and fled through the storm, dragging the captured wight between them. The wind howled around them, carrying the sound of pursuit. Shrieks, the pounding of countless feet, the rattle of bones upon the ice. By dawn, they reached the edge of a frozen lake. The ice stretched wide and smooth, broken only by black cracks that spidered beneath the surface. The mountains loomed behind them, and far to the south lay the faint glow of Eastwatch's torches. "We'll make our stand here," Jon said, his voice ragged. The company crossed the lake, their boots creaking upon the ice. But as they reached the center, the dead appeared again, pouring from the hills, their ranks endless, their eyes like stars in a night without mercy. Jon turned to fight, but Beric caught his arm. "We can't outrun them," the older man said. "We fight until they stop, or until the gods see fit to end us." The first wave reached them. The ice cracked underfoot as steel met bone. The world became a storm of noise and flame, men shouting, the wights hissing, the sound of breaking ice beneath their boots. One of the wights lunged, dragging Jon down. He rolled aside, its rotten hands clawing at his throat. With a shout, he drove Longclaw through its skull. The hound threw a flaming jar, and fire burst across the surface of the lake. The dead screamed, falling back from the flames. For a moment, the circle held, but then the ice groaned, deep and low. A crack ran through it like lightning, spreading beneath their feet. The lake shuddered, and the surface gave way. Men and wights alike plunged into the freezing water. The cold was like knives, driving the air from Jon's lungs. He kicked free, breaking through the ice, gasping as the wind tore the breath from him. Around him, the dead sank into darkness. When he pulled himself onto solid ground, he looked back to see his friends trapped upon a small island of ice in the lake's center, the dead surrounding them on all sides. The hound stood beside Beric, his sword aflame. "We'll freeze before they reach us," he shouted. Jon struggled to his feet, shivering violently. The dead stood at the lake's edge, still as statues, their empty eyes fixed upon the living. They would wait. Death had all the time in the world. Jon could see the despair in his men's faces, the hopelessness settling like frost. He looked skyward, his breath rising like smoke. "Daenerys," he whispered. And as if the wind itself heard him, a sound answered, a faint roar, growing louder, deeper. The dead turned their heads toward the sky. From beyond the mountains came a blaze of gold and flame. Drogon descended first, his wings blotting out the sun, his roar shaking the frozen earth. Behind him came Rhaegal and Viserion, their fire lighting the world. Daenerys Targaryen rode upon Drogon's back, her hair streaming like silver fire. The dragons struck like falling stars. Fire swept across the dead, burning them where they stood, melting the ice beneath their feet. The shrieks of the dying rose into the wind. Jon ran, cutting down the few that reached him. Drogon landed hard upon the ice, his claws cracking it wide. Daenerys reached out her hand. "Come!" she shouted. He grabbed it, pulling himself up behind her, and the others climbed aboard. Drogon's wings unfurled, lifting them into the storm, but as they rose, the air turned colder still. A silence fell, deep, terrible, absolute. From the far ridge, the Night King appeared. He raised his arm. A spear of ice gleamed in his hand, and when he threw it, the sky itself seemed to break. The spear of ice cut through the air like lightning. It struck true. The sound was not thunder nor steel upon steel, but something deeper, a crack that seemed to split the heart of the world. The spear pierced Viserion's chest, bursting through scale and bone. For an instant, the golden dragon screamed, a cry of pain that echoed across the frozen lake and up into the heavens. His wings faltered, fire and blood poured from the wound, turning to steam before it reached the ground. Daenerys turned sharply, her eyes wide with horror. "Viserion!" she cried, the name torn from her throat. Jon could only stare. The dragon's light was fading, his wings thrashing weakly against the cold air. Then, with one final heart-wrenching cry, Viserion fell, plunging from the sky into the frozen lake below. The ice shattered, water exploded upward, and then silence swallowed all sound. But the wind. The Night King lowered his arm. His pale eyes never left Daenerys. "Go!" Jon shouted, gripping her shoulder, but she did not move. She sat frozen, her gaze locked upon the place where her dragon had fallen. Below, the dead surged forward once more, undeterred by flame or fear. They spilled onto the ice like a tide of shadows. "Daenerys!" Jon seized her arm, shaking her from her trance. "Fly!" Drogon roared, spreading his vast wings. Fire erupted from his throat, sweeping across the dead in a river of flame. The heat was blinding. Jon felt it scorch his face as the dragon leapt from the lake, the rush of air knocking him backward. He looked back. The others were aboard, Tormund, the Hound, Jorah, Beric. But as Drogon rose, the ice beneath Jon's feet began to crack. He turned just in time to see the fishers racing toward him. "Jon!" Daenerys screamed. The ice gave way. He fell into the black water, the cold swallowing him whole. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no light. Only the crushing weight of the water and the darkness closing in around him. His limbs were numb, his lungs burning. Images flickered through his mind. Winterfell under snow, Arya's laughter, Sansa's quiet strength, his father's voice. When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. He fought upward, kicking, reaching for the surface that seemed to drift farther and farther away. The cold pressed against his chest like iron. His strength was fading. Then faintly he saw light, a flicker above him, pale and wavering. He pushed toward it with the last of his strength, breaking through the ice in an explosion of water and air. He gasped, choking, dragging himself onto the surface. The world spun around him, a blur of white and gray. The dead were everywhere. They closed in upon him, blue eyes gleaming. Jon staggered to his feet, Longclaw heavy in his hands. The sword felt distant, unreal, as though he were fighting in a dream. He swung at the nearest wight, cleaving it in half, then another and another. But they kept coming. Through the mist, a horn sounded, low, mournful, then another. From the east, riders emerged, cloaked in black, wielding flaming blades. They fell upon the dead like a storm. At their head rode a figure shrouded in shadow, his eyes burning like distant embers. Jon blinked through the snow. "Benjen," he whispered. His uncle dismounted, swinging his flaming chain with deadly grace. cutting down the whites that swarmed around them. "You've done enough, lad," Benjen said, his voice calm amid the chaos. "Time to go." He pulled Jon onto his horse and struck it hard. The beast leapt forward, galloping toward the south. Jon twisted in the saddle to look back, but Benjen had turned again to face the oncoming tide. Fire danced around him, casting long shadows across the snow. "Come with me," Jon shouted. Benjen shook his head. "I cannot pass the wall. Go!" Then he was gone, swallowed by the dead. The horse carried Jon across the tundra until it could go no farther. He fell from the saddle, landing hard upon the snow. The world blurred, his vision dimming. The last thing he saw was the black stone of the wall rising before him, vast and terrible against the dawn. When next he opened his eyes, he was warm. The scent of smoke and salt filled the air. He was aboard a ship, lying beneath heavy furs. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming still. But when he turned his head, she was there. Daenerys sat beside him, her face pale and drawn. Her eyes were red, not from the cold, but from tears. When she saw him stir, relief washed over her features. "Jon," she whispered. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry. She reached for a cup and held it to his lips. The water burned down his throat. But it was life. "You're safe," she said. "We thought you lost." He swallowed and met her gaze. "Viserion." Her expression faltered. "He's gone." Jon turned his face toward the ceiling, the weight of loss pressing upon his chest. "I'm sorry." She shook her head slowly. "You tried to save us. You risked everything for people you barely know. That's what we have to do," Jon said weakly. "We fight for the living." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then softly, "I will fight with you. I will fight for the North." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something unspoken and fragile, like a flame in a storm. The ship sailed south, the sea calm beneath a gray sky. Yet Daenerys' mind was not on the waves. She stood upon the deck, staring northward, toward the place where her dragon had fallen. In the distance, the wall loomed, ancient, immense, silent. Snow drifted against its surface, untouched by sun or flame. Beyond it, the wind howled, carrying with it the sound of things that no longer breathed. Far to the north, where the lake had frozen once more, a pale figure stood upon the ice. The Night King gazed down at the black water where Viserion had fallen. Around him, the dead moved in silence. Slowly, he raised his hand. The surface of the lake stirred. Bubbles rose through the cracks, and then, with a groan of breaking ice, the dragon's body emerged. Its wings hung limp, its scales pale and lifeless. The dead hauled it onto the shore. The Night King stepped closer. He placed his hand upon Viserion's snout. Frost crept from his touch, spreading across the dragon's flesh. The blue light returned to its eyes, cold and fierce. When the creature's wings spread, ice cracked, and the air filled with the sound of death reborn. Viserion rose, no longer golden flame, but pale and terrible, a dragon of frost, bound to the will of the dead. Above them, the sky broke open, and the first true snow of winter began to fall. The long night had come again. Winterfell lay beneath a veil of frost and silence. The sky above was the color of iron, and the wind that swept through the battlements carried the scent of snow and far-off storms. The ravens had come days ago, black messengers from the wall, bearing tidings that chilled the blood of all who read them. Jon Snow had returned from beyond the wall, half dead and colder than the ice itself, yet the news he brought was colder still. The Night King had a dragon now, a dragon whose fire was not of flame, but of frost and death. In the great hall, the lords and ladies of the north gathered beneath the flickering torches. Their breath misted in the air. Even the fires in the hearth seemed to burn with little warmth. Lady Sansa Stark stood at the high table, her red hair gleaming like a banner in the dim light. Her eyes, blue as winter skies, swept across the hall as she spoke. "The wall may not stand much longer," she said, her voice steady though her heart quaked. "If it falls, the dead will march upon us first. We must be ready." Lord Glover rose, his hands trembling. "Ready? With what? Our men are few. Our fields are bare. We've fought too many wars already, and for what? Another to die in the snow?" "The North remembers," said Lady Lyanna Mormont, her small frame dwarfed by the table before her, but her voice rang clear as steel. "We stand for House Stark, for the living." The hall murmured. Sansa allowed herself the faintest flicker of a smile at the girl's courage. But her thoughts were far away, northward, beyond the snows, where Jon still rode toward her with the Dragon Queen at his side. That thought brought unease to her heart. She had seen queens before, beautiful, proud, and deadly, and though Sansa owed her brother everything, she could not help but wonder what kind of fire he had invited into their home. Outside the walls, the land slept beneath its frozen blanket. The trees stood like ghosts, their branches heavy with snow. In the distance, the river had turned to glass, and the sky was filled with crows wheeling endlessly above the fields. When the horn sounded, the people came to the battlements. From the east, the riders appeared, black cloaks, silver banners, and the flash of dragons against the pale sky. The dragons came first, descending like thunder. Drogon's wings blotted out the sun as he swept low over the walls, his roar shaking the stones. Rhaegal followed, green scales glimmering like emeralds in the light. The people of Winterfell fell to their knees, some in awe, some in terror. And then Daenerys Targaryen came riding through the gates, her cloak of white fur billowing behind her, her hair bright as starlight. Jon rode beside her, his face stern, his eyes shadowed by all he had seen. The gates closed behind them, and Winterfell, for the first time in a generation, felt the breath of dragons upon its walls. That night, the great hall was alive with voices and fire. The Northmen feasted, though uneasily, their eyes often flicking toward the Dragon Queen. Daenerys sat beside Jon at the high table, her gaze calm but distant. The hall's warmth could not thaw the cold that lingered in her bones. Sansa watched them from her seat, studying every glance, every word. She could see the way Jon looked at Daenerys, not as one looks upon a queen, but as one looks upon something they do not yet understand. When the meal was done and the hall began to empty, she approached him. "You should rest," she said softly. "I will," Jon replied, "when the wall stands again." "It won't," she said. "Not after what you told us. A dragon, raised from death. How do we fight such a thing?" "With fire," he said. "With dragon glass, with every man and woman willing to stand." Sansa studied him. "And with her?" Jon hesitated. "She's not what I thought she'd be. But she's not our enemy." "She's a Targaryen," Sansa said. "Her father burned the north. You think the daughter of the Mad King is so different?" Jon's eyes hardened. "I've seen her risk her life to save mine. I've seen her lose what she loves to fight for the living. She's earned our trust." Sansa's voice softened. "And if she asks for your crown?" Jon looked away, the firelight dancing across his face. "Then I'll decide when that day comes." In the days that followed, Winterfell changed. The dragons nested upon the hills beyond the walls, their shadows vast upon the snow. The Unsullied drilled in the courtyards, their armor gleaming in the cold light. Northmen watched them with suspicion, but slowly, grudgingly, they began to work beside them. Jon spent his days in the yard, training men to fight the dead, teaching them to wield dragonglass spears and blades. At night, he walked the ramparts with Daenerys, speaking of what was to come. Once, as they looked northward over the frozen fields, Daenerys said quietly, "I dreamed of this place, of snow and wolves. I never thought it could be beautiful." Jon glanced at her. "It's beautiful because it's harsh, like the North itself. It doesn't love easily." She smiled faintly. "Then perhaps the North and I are not so different." Jon did not answer, but something passed between them, a silent understanding, born not of words, but of shared loss. Far to the north, beyond the ruins of Eastwatch, the wall no longer stood unbroken. Where Viserion's frost fire had struck, there was now only emptiness, a wound carved through ice and stone. Through that breach, the dead had come. They moved like a storm, silent, endless, merciless. At their head rode the Night King upon his undead dragon, its wings vast and pale, its breath a weapon that froze the very air. Wherever it passed, life withered, trees shattered, rivers turned to ice, the earth itself cracked beneath its frost. The wall's ruins gleamed blue in the darkness, lit by the cold fire of the beast. The army that followed stretched from horizon to horizon, giants of ice, whites by the tens of thousands, all marching south. The living world lay before them, and the long night followed in their wake. At Winterfell, the ravens came again, bearing news of the fall of the wall. Jon stood before the hearth, the letter in his hand. The room was still. Outside, the wind keened against the windows like a wolf's lament. Sansa read his face before he spoke. "They've come," she whispered. He nodded. "They'll be here before the moon turns." Daenerys entered then, her expression grave. "We'll stand together," she said. "Fire and ice, the living and the dead. This is where we make our stand." Jon looked into the flames. "Then we fight. For Winterfell, for the North, for everyone who still draws breath." The fire snapped, and for a heartbeat, it seemed to burn blue. Outside, the snow began to fall harder, silent and ceaseless, the first flakes of the storm to come, and beyond the mountains, the dragon of ice screamed into the night, heralding the dawn of the long winter. The days grew shorter. The nights stretched like shadows without end. Winter had come to the north in full, and Winterfell stood braced against it, a fortress of stone and will, defying the storm that gathered beyond its walls. The ravens no longer flew. The roads had vanished beneath snow and ice. All that remained was the endless white, stretching northward toward the dark horizon, where death waited. Jon Snow stood upon the battlements, his cloak snapping in the wind. Below him, the yard was alive with grim purpose. Men and women, lords and small folk, Northmen and unsullied alike, labored together by torchlight, raising new defenses, sharpening blades, fitting arrows with obsidian tips. Fires burned day and night, 1,000 small flames against the dark. Sansa Stark walked beside him, her breath curling in the air. "Every hearth is full," she said. "We've brought in all who would come. Farmers from the Barrowlands, fisherfolk from the coast. There's no room left, not even in the crypts." "Let them stay there if they must," Jon said. "Better a crowded hall than an empty one." Sansa nodded, though her eyes were troubled. "If the dead breach the walls..." Jon turned to her. "Then Winterfell falls, and the world with it." She said nothing after that. The wind carried the faint sound of hammers and distant singing, a rough, desperate tune that rose from the men at the forges. Below, Daenerys Targaryen moved through the yard, cloaked in white furs, her hair silver beneath the torchlight. The dragons roared somewhere beyond the walls, a sound that rolled like thunder through the cold night. "She's not what I expected," Sansa said quietly. Jon's eyes followed Daenerys as she spoke to a group of smiths, her voice calm and commanding. "She's a queen," he said. "And a good one." Sansa's voice was sharp. "You sound as though you've forgotten the North has a queen already." Jon looked at her. "I haven't forgotten, but she's not our enemy. You've seen what she brings. The dragons, her armies. We need her, Sansa." "And what will she need in return?" Sansa asked, her tone soft but cutting. "Queens never give freely, not even good ones." Jon's jaw tightened. "Then I'll pay whatever price she asks. If the North is to live, I'll give her my loyalty." Sansa's eyes flickered. "And what of your heart?" "That too." He didn't answer. The wind moaned through the towers, cold and endless. That night, the great hall was filled not with song but with strategy. The lords of the North, the captains of the Unsullied, the knights of the Vale, all gathered around the great wooden table where the map of the realm was spread. Candles burned low, their wax pooling like melted snow. Tormund Giantsbane thumped his fist upon the table. "We'll line the trenches with fire," he said. "When the dead come, we'll burn them faster than they can rise." "The dead do not fear fire," said Grey Worm, his voice steady as stone. "They walk through it if they must." "But they die in it," Beric Dondarrion countered, the flame from his sword reflected in his one good eye. "Every white burned is one less for the Night King to command." Arya sat near the far end of the table, sharpening a dragonglass dagger with calm precision. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes burned with quiet purpose. "We can't kill them all," she said, "but if we can cut off the head, the rest will fall." Jon finished. Daenerys leaned over the table, her fingers resting upon the carved shape of Winterfell. "Then the Night King is our true enemy. My dragons will strike at him directly." Jon shook his head. "You can't risk them. He has one of his own now." Her gaze met his. "Then I'll face him myself." Jon's voice rose, quiet but fierce. "If you fall, the living lose their last hope." Silence followed. The hall's fire crackled, and outside, the wind howled like a grieving wolf. At last, Daenerys spoke. "Then we fight together. You lead from the walls. I'll fly with Drogon and Rhaegal. Between us, we'll burn a path through their ranks." Jon nodded. "And pray the gods are watching." As the days passed, Winterfell became an armed camp. The smell of pitch and smoke filled the air. The dragons circled above the walls, their wings stirring the snow into whirlwinds. Jon moved among his men, speaking little but working tirelessly, training archers, inspecting barricades, setting traps where the dead might falter. Each night, he climbed the walls and gazed north, where the stars dimmed behind an ever-thickening veil of cloud. Daenerys joined him often. They stood side by side in the cold, saying little. Once, she said, "You believe you were meant for this." He turned to her. "Meant?" She nodded. "To fight this war, to lead these people, to die for them, if you must." Jon looked out across the snow. "I don't know what I was meant for, but I know what must be done." She smiled sadly. "Duty is the death of dreams." He looked at her then, his breath misting between them. "And yet dreams are what keep us alive." Their eyes held, the fire of her spirit, the frost of his resolve, two forces drawn together by the same storm. The army of the dead was sighted at dawn. They came from the north like a blizzard, an unending mass of shadows moving through the storm. The horns sounded across Winterfell, 3 long, mournful blasts that shook the very stones. The living moved to their posts. The trenches were lit, the gates barred, arrows dipped in pitch were raised to the sky. The air smelled of fear and fire. Jon mounted his horse beside Daenerys. The dragons shrieked above, their eyes burning in the dark. Across the plain, the enemy appeared, an army without breath, without mercy, without end. At their head rode the Night King, his eyes blue and cold as death itself. Beneath him, the undead Viserion beat his wings, sending gales of ice across the field. Daenerys looked to Jon. "If I fall, you won't," he said. She smiled faintly. "You don't know that." He met her gaze. "I know I won't let it happen." The first wave of the dead began to run, thousands upon thousands, their screams rising like the sound of tearing metal. The ground itself seemed to tremble beneath their feet. Jon raised his sword. "Archers!" The sky filled with fire. Arrows streaked across the night, burning as they flew, striking the front lines of the dead. Still they came, crawling over the bodies of their fallen, relentless. The trenches ignited, sending walls of flame roaring across the field. For a heartbeat, the dead recoiled. Then, from the sky, the undead dragon screamed. Its breath poured forth in a torrent of icy fire, extinguishing the flames, freezing men where they stood. "Dany!" Jon shouted. She spurred Drogon into the air, rising to meet her fallen child. Fire met frost in the heavens, their roars shaking the stars. The 2 dragons clashed above the battlefield, their flames lighting the storm. On the ground, the dead surged forward again. The living met them with steel and fire, the clash echoing through the night. The world dissolved into chaos, sword against bone, fire against ice, life against death. Jon fought his way through the press, Longclaw gleaming with each strike. Around him, the dead fell and rose again. His muscles screamed, his breath burned, yet he did not falter. Above, Daenerys' dragonfire turned the sky to flame. Below, the Night King watched from his steed of frost, unmoved, patient as the grave. And as the storm thickened, a single truth became clear. This night would not end until one world devoured the other. Fire or ice, life or death, the dawn would belong to only one. Night devoured the world. The storm thickened until sky and earth became one, a maelstrom of snow and ash and shadow. Winterfell stood at its heart, an island of fire besieged by death. The wind carried the cries of the dying, the clash of steel and the roar of dragons overhead. Jon Snow moved through the chaos, Longclaw a pale arc of light in his hands. The dead pressed against the walls in endless waves, clawing, shrieking, their blue eyes burning like frozen stars. Archers fired until their quivers were empty. Swordsmen swung until their arms failed. Still, the dead came on. Above, Drogon and Rhaegal circled the storm, their fire painting the sky in molten gold. Yet even Dragonflame could not hold the tide forever. Wherever they burned one horde to ash, another rose from the snow. And beyond them, upon wings of ice, came Viserion, the fallen dragon, reborn in death. His frost fire tore the heavens apart. Wherever it struck, flame died. Men froze where they stood, and stone itself cracked beneath the cold. Jon looked up in horror as the creature swept low over the battlements. The icy breath of the beast carved through the defenses, shattering towers, freezing men to statues where they stood. "Fall back," he shouted, though his voice was drowned by the wind. The trenches blazed again as Melisandre's torches found their mark. The firelight flickered against her red robes as she walked through the chaos. her face calm, her eyes reflecting the flames. She raised her hands to the sky and spoke words that burned the air. The fire flared higher, golden and bright, forcing the dead to pause before its heat. But not for long. From the ranks of the fallen came a new sound, a deep, groaning crack that seemed to rise from the frozen earth itself. The corpses of those who had fallen earlier began to move, rising once more, their limbs stiff but unbroken. Even the dead of the living turned their faces toward their former kin. Jon felt the despair like a knife. "Fall back to the keep," he roared. "To the walls!" The defenders fled through the gates, dragging the wounded behind them. The dead swarmed over the outer yard, their claws scraping the stones. Inside the hall, the great doors slammed shut, barred with iron. The survivors pressed together in the dark, the sound of pounding and screams beyond the gate filling the air. Sansa stood among them, her face pale but unyielding. Arya moved like a shadow at her side, blades gleaming in each hand. The North's last daughters stood together in the hall their ancestors had built, awaiting the end. In the Godswood, the Heart Tree watched in silence as the storm howled through its branches. Its red leaves shivered like wounds. Beneath it sat Bran Stark, his eyes white and distant, his mind soaring through the storm. Ravens circled above, 1,000 dark eyes seeing the battle from every angle. Through them, Bran saw everything: the dragons above, the fire and death below, the creeping figure of the Night King upon his undead steed. He rode through the storm like a phantom, untouched by flame or blade, his gaze fixed upon Winterfell's heart. He was coming for Bran. Jon fought his way through the courtyard, cutting down wights as he went. Tormund's voice boomed nearby, rallying the living with curses and laughter. The Hound battled beside Arya at the hall steps, their movements like flame and shadow. A roar split the heavens. Rhaegal and Viserion collided above, tearing at each other with claws and teeth. Blue flame met red, and the sky burst with light. Both dragons fell, locked in death's embrace, vanishing into the storm. Drogon screamed in rage. His fire poured across the battlefield, turning hundreds of the dead to ash. Yet even he could not reach the Night King, who moved steadily forward through the blizzard, his spear of ice gleaming in his hand. Jon saw him and felt the chill of fate settle upon his shoulders. He began to run. He fought his way through the dead, through flame and frost, through pain that felt older than time itself. His body was numb, his sword heavy, but he pressed on. At last, he broke through into the Godswood. The air there was still, heavy with snow and silence. Bran sat beneath the Heart Tree, his eyes white and unseeing, and before him stood the Night King. He was taller than any man, his armor black as midnight, his face carved from ice. The storm seemed to move around him, bowing to his will, his eyes, blue and endless, fixed upon Bran. Jon raised Longclaw and charged. The Night King turned, his spear sweeping toward him in one fluid motion. Jon dodged, the blade whistling past his ear. He struck, steel meeting ice, sparks flying. For a moment, they were locked, fire and frost, life and death. The Night King's strength was inhuman. Each blow sent tremors through Jon's bones. Jon struck again, until Longclaw's edge splintered against the frozen armor. The Night King seized him by the throat, lifting him from the ground. Jon gasped, the cold burning his skin, his vision dimming. Then came a cry, a sound like the wind through glass. Arya leapt from the shadows, her dagger of Valyrian steel flashing through the air. The Night King turned, but too late. The blade struck home. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the Night King shattered, exploding into shards of ice that fell like snow upon the Godswood. The storm broke. The whites collapsed as one, their blue eyes fading. The world fell still. Jon dropped to his knees, gasping. The snow was red with blood and ash. Arya stood before him, her face streaked with dirt, her dagger black with frost. She looked at him, and for a moment, she was a child again, a wolf of Winterfell. Bran's eyes opened. "It's done," he said softly. "For now." Jon stared at the place where the Night King had fallen. Nothing remained but a faint trace of ice, melting slowly into the earth. Above them, the dawn began to break. Pale light spilled across the snow, washing the battlefield in gold. The dead were gone. The living stood in silence, scarcely believing what their eyes beheld. Daenerys descended from the sky upon Drogon's back, her hair wild, her face streaked with soot and tears. She saw Jon, and the relief in her eyes broke something within him. "It's over," he said hoarsely. She shook her head. "No, not yet. There are other wars still to come." Jon looked to the east, where the sun rose red as blood. "Then we'll face them together." Sansa and Arya joined them, their faces solemn in the new light. Around them, the fires smoldered, the ruins of Winterfell standing proud amid the snow. And though victory had come, the wind still carried a chill that would not fade. For in the heart of every living soul, they knew this truth. Winter had been beaten back, but it had not been destroyed. The world would never again be as it was. The dawn had come, but it was the dawn after the long night, and even in victory, the shadows remained. The dawn that followed the long night was thin and gray, a pale light trembling upon the frost-bitten fields of Winterfell. Smoke drifted from the broken towers and the charred pyres in the yard. The air was still heavy with the stench of fire and blood, yet for the first time in memory, the wind carried no echo of war. Jon Snow stood upon the battlements, the world below him hushed and strange. The snow had begun to melt, revealing the black earth beneath, as though the land itself was waking from a long and terrible dream. From the west came the slow tolling of the bells, one for the fallen of the north, one for the south, one for all the living who would never return from the night. He watched the smoke drift upward toward a sky that was neither blue nor white, but some fragile shade between, as if the heavens themselves were uncertain what season it was. His breath rose before him, a ghost that vanished with the wind. Behind him, footsteps sounded lightly on the stone. He turned to see Daenerys Targaryen, cloaked in furs of white and silver, her face pale but proud. Her hair had come loose, and strands of it caught the weak sunlight like threads of glass. "They'll be lighting the pyres soon," she said softly. Jon nodded. "They deserve their rest." "They do," she agreed. Her eyes drifted to the horizon. "So many dead, and yet, for the first time I see peace. I should feel relief. But all I feel is emptiness." He studied her face. "You fought your whole life for a dream, Daenerys. Now that the war is done, you must learn to live." She gave a small, bitter smile. "And what would I live for, Jon Snow?" "For the living," he said simply. "For the world we saved." Her gaze lingered on him. "And you? What will you do now?" Jon looked down at the yard where men labored to rebuild the shattered walls, their movements slow but steady. "The North will need rebuilding. So will the realm. There'll be no peace if the living fall to fighting among themselves again." Daenerys' voice was quiet, but sharp. "You speak of peace, but I can already feel the wind shifting. The lords of the South will never accept me as queen, not after this war. They'll whisper that I am foreign, That I bring dragons and fire instead of mercy. Jon met her eyes. Then show them mercy. Her expression darkened. Mercy cannot rule a kingdom. Fear can. Jon's voice grew firm. We've seen what fear makes of rulers. For a long moment, she said nothing. The wind stirred her hair, and her eyes, violet and fierce, gleamed like amethysts in the pale light. Then she said softly, "You sound like him." "Who?" "Your father," she said. "The man you never knew." Jon frowned. "Ned Stark?" She shook her head. "No, the other one." The words hung in the cold air between them. Jon's heart tightened. He had known it for some time, the truth whispered to him by Sam and Bran, the truth of his birth. Aegon Targaryen, blood of dragons, heir to a throne he had never wanted. He turned from her, staring northward into the fading snow. "That name means nothing to me. Yet it means everything to others," Daenerys said quietly. "When they learn who you are, what will they see? A rival, a usurper, or a man who refuses his destiny?" Jon did not answer. She stepped closer, her voice soft but urgent. "I have seen the wheel of power spin all my life, kings rising and falling, each crushing the people beneath. I will break it, Jon. I will build a new world, free of fear and chains. But I cannot do it alone." He turned to her then, his eyes full of sorrow. "You're asking me to stand beside you. I'm asking you to rule with me." The words hung heavy, the promise of them bright as fire and dangerous as steel. Jon took a step back. "The people will not follow two rulers. They will only divide." "Then let them learn," she said. "Let them see that fire and ice can rule together, not destroy each other." For a heartbeat, he saw it, the dream of peace she spoke of, shining like dawn upon a broken world. But beneath it, he also saw the shadow of what it might cost. He thought of the fire that had devoured her enemies, the rage that smoldered in her eyes when she spoke of thrones and crowns. "I swore to fight for the living," he said at last, "not to rule them." Daenerys looked away, her jaw tightening. "And what will you do when the living turn on each other again? Walk away?" He had no answer. By nightfall, the pyres were lit. The flames rose high and bright against the dark sky, their glow visible for miles. The air was filled with the crackle of fire and the low murmur of prayers. Names were spoken and lost to the wind. Jon stood beside Sansa and Arya. The sisters were silent, their faces carved of stone. Bran sat near the fire, his eyes reflecting the flames, distant and knowing. Daenerys stood apart, her expression unreadable. Drogon lay coiled in the shadows beyond the pyres, his scales gleaming red in the light. He loosed a low, mournful rumble that echoed through the night, a dirge for his fallen kin, for all the lives lost to the war. As the fire burned, Jon's thoughts drifted northward, beyond the wall, beyond even the memory of war. He thought of the free folk, of the land untouched by kings or crowns, where life endured not through conquest, but through survival. There was peace there of a sort, a hard peace, but a true one. When the flames died low, he turned to Sansa. "You'll rule the North now," he said quietly. "The people trust you. They always have." Her eyes softened, though her voice was steady. "And you? Where will you go?" Jon looked toward the cold horizon. "North, to the lands beyond the wall. There are still things worth protecting there." Arya stepped closer. "You'll never stop fighting, will you?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's who I am." At dawn, the gates of Winterfell opened for the last time. The wind blew cold through the yard, carrying with it the scent of smoke and pine. Jon rode out with Ghost at his side, his cloak gray against the snow. The free folk followed him in silence, their faces turned north. Daenerys watched from the walls, her dragons wheeling high above. She did not call out. She only watched, her hand clenched around the stone of the parapet until the last shadow of him disappeared into the mist. Sansa stood beside her, her voice low. He'll never return. Daenerys's gaze did not waver. No, but he will always be the North's true son. The queen turned away, her face unreadable. Behind her, the rebuilt banners of the direwolf and dragon fluttered side by side in the wind, symbols of a fragile peace. Far to the north, beyond the wall, the snows began to fall again, soft and endless. Jon rode into the wilds, where the world was white and quiet, and the ghosts of the past faded with each step. The war was over. The dawn had come. But in the heart of winter, the wind still whispered of kings and dragons, of love and duty, of fire and ice. And in that whisper, the song of the North lived on.